Hi and welcome, I'm AnewZ and you are watching AnewZ. Here are the headlines. An AnewZ investigation reveals new details about the Azerbaijan Airlines flight crash. Russia and Ukraine continue with airstrikes on each other's territories. Donald Trump says he would like to meet Vladimir Putin and end the war in Ukraine. Thank you for tuning in. An AnewZ investigation has revealed new details about the Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 crash. Sources indicate that the aircraft was brought down by a missile, and those responsible have been identified. Azerbaijan insists on full accountability and is prepared to take legal action if necessary. Here's the latest.
As the investigation into the Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 crash continues, new findings emerging from Russian sources suggest that the aircraft was shot down by a Pantsir S-1 air defense system, which had been brought to Russia from Syria. According to reliable sources familiar with the investigation, Russian officials have also determined that electronic warfare systems were deployed against the Azerbaijani aircraft, leading to severe malfunctions in its control systems before the crash. Sources indicate that Russian investigators have identified both the individual who launched the missile and the official who gave the order. However, it remains unclear whether Moscow will publicly disclose their names or attempt to evade responsibility. AnewZ is actively working to verify the authenticity of the names we obtained. Diplomatic sources confirm that Azerbaijan refuses to allow the case to be hushed up and remains resolute in its demand for accountability. Should Russia attempt to avoid responsibility, Baku intends to take the matter to international courts to ensure justice for the victims. The latest revelations align with Azerbaijan's initial findings, which pointed to an external explosion as the likely cause of the crash. High-resolution images and forensic analysis from the crash site indicated that the damage was consistent with a missile strike, not an internal malfunction. In a previous statement, Azerbaijan's Minister of Digital Development and Transport, Rashad Nabiev, noted that preliminary investigation results had already ruled out any technical failure or pilot error, reinforcing the missile strike theory. Azerbaijani President İlham Aliyev also made Azerbaijan's position clear.
Bugün biz tam açıkaydı. Diyebiliriz ki Rusya tarafından terör vuruldu.
We can clearly say today that the plane was shot down by Russia. This is a fact, and no one can deny this fact. Again, we are not saying that this was done intentionally, but it was done. We have clearly expressed our demands to the Russian side. These demands were officially communicated to them on the 27th of December. What do these demands consist of? First of all, the Russian side must apologize to Azerbaijan. Secondly, it must acknowledge its guilt. Thirdly, those responsible must be punished, brought to criminal responsibility, and compensation must be paid to the Azerbaijani state, to the injured passengers and crew members. These are our conditions.
Now let's have a look back at survivors' testimonies. Here's the story of a stewardess and a passenger who shared their account of the final moments of the tragic flight.
There were two explosions outside the plane and shrapnel fell into the plane's cabin. These are the words of Aydan Rahimli. She is a stewardess of Azerbaijani Airlines, one of the survivors of Baku-Grozny flight.
The plane was in good condition. There was no malfunction. It attempted to land at Grozny Airport once, but it didn't succeed. It tried a second time, but again, it was unsuccessful. On the third attempt, the plane was struck from the left side. At that moment, oxygen masks dropped down.
After the explosion, chaos engulfed the plane cabin and the passengers panicked. Stewardess Aydan tried her best to calm them, but soon her fellow flight attendant got wounded.
We were trying to calm the passengers and telling them not to unfasten their seatbelts. Then we heard the sound of an explosion, and a second strike occurred. After the second strike, our flight attendant, Mr. Zulfigar, was injured in the arm. I provided first aid and gave him water. Those moments were very stressful because he could have lost a lot of blood, and it was necessary to stop the bleeding.
And that is when emergency landing was announced by pilots, and lead flight attendant Hükümet started to give instructions to cabin crew and passengers.
Lead stewardess asked, "Do you know what to do as a first aid?" And I said yes. She said, "Okay, then we are making an emergency landing, but it should have been a normal emergency landing." We did not know what's going to happen. Ms. Hokuma explained to the passengers all the necessary information about the situation. She said, "Everything is going to be fine."
Aydan says she was at the very back of the plane, at the place of service of flight attendants. In the last minutes, she only saw the passengers who were in the brace position, according to emergency landing rules.
The plane continued to fly, searching for a place to land. It wasn't working. It kept ascending and descending. The most tragic moments were at the very end. At that moment, the plane started rapidly descending. We were all seated, removed the mask, and tightened our seatbelts. I lowered my head and sat in the brace position. The plane was still descending. Then I was thrown to the right, then to the left. The seatbelt held me in place. When I opened my eyes, the plane was upside down.
Seatbelts fastened stewardess to her seat and she stayed there until very end. Aydan Rahimli says they did not know where they landed. When she got out of plane, people were already there to help, and it was then Aydan heard that they are in Aktau, Kazakhstan. Stewardess of Azal says it is a miracle that half of the people survived the crash. One of these survivors already recorded his last-minute prayers. Passenger Supankul Rahimov said he had begun to recite prayers and prepare for the end after hearing the bang.
I wasn't even sure that I would stay alive. I already thought that it was all over. After the bang, I already got my mindset that something bad would happen now, because it was clear that the plane had received damage. I was conscious when I felt the impact. I was being thrown back and forth. It all lasted for a few seconds, and then silence. Everything was quiet, and I realized that was it. We had landed.
Eventually, Baku-Grozny flight had landed. For some, it was the last destination, while for the others, Aktau will be a place of rebirth to the second life.
Russian media was trying to shift the narrative on the Azerbaijan Airlines flight crash near Aktau. They have blamed technical issues, citing an alleged transcript. However, experts viewed this as part of a familiar pattern of denial in past aviation tragedies.
On 1 September 1983, a Korean Airlines Boeing 747 was en route from Anchorage to Seoul when it strayed off course into Soviet airspace near Sakhalin Island. The USSR's response: a Soviet Su-15 fighter jet piloted by Major Gennady Osipovich was dispatched to intercept the aircraft. Despite the fact that the Boeing 747 was a civilian airliner, Soviet authorities perceived it as a spy aircraft, allegedly confusing it with an American RC-135 reconnaissance jet. Osipovich fired 2 missiles, bringing the plane down. All 269 passengers and crew perished. For days, Moscow refused to acknowledge responsibility, with Soviet Defense Minister Dmitry Ustinov pushing for complete denial in Politburo meetings. When the truth became undeniable, General Nikolai Ogarkov took the stage, claiming the aircraft was on a deliberate spy mission coordinated by Washington and Tokyo. It wasn't until 1990, amid perestroika, that Mikhail Gorbachev formally admitted Soviet responsibility. By then, the damage to the USSR's international reputation had already been done. Fast forward 3 decades, and another Boeing, another missile, and another denial. On 17th July 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, a Boeing 777, was flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it was shot down over eastern Ukraine. The aircraft was at 33,000 feet, cruising over Donetsk, an area controlled by Russian-backed separatists, when it suddenly disappeared from radar. The wreckage was scattered over a 50 square kilometer area. All 298 people on board, including 193 Dutch nationals, 43 Malaysians, and 27 Australians, were killed instantly. International investigators quickly determined that the aircraft had been struck by a Buk surface-to-air missile, a system used by Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade based in Kursk. Russia's reaction followed a familiar pattern: initial denial. Moscow claimed Ukrainian forces had shot down the plane. Disinformation campaigns. Russian state media pushed dozens of alternative theories, including claims that a Ukrainian fighter jet had attacked MH17. Fabricated evidence. Russian authorities even produced radar and satellite images attempting to shift the blame, many of which were later debunked. Obstruction of justice. Moscow refused to cooperate with international investigations and blocked UN resolutions aimed at holding those responsible accountable. After years of investigation, a Dutch-led joint investigation team, JET, concluded that the missile system had been transported from Russia into Ukraine and fired by separatist forces. In November 2022, a Dutch court convicted 3 pro-Russian separatists in absentia for their role in the attack. But Moscow has never admitted responsibility, echoing the denials of 1983. Now, in 2024, another passenger aircraft tragedy unfolds, and the playbook remains unchanged. The Azerbaijan Airlines flight 8243 crash near Aktau bore clear similarities to the previous incidents. Preliminary findings indicated that the plane was struck by a Russian surface-to-air missile, SAM, over Chechnya before it lost control. High-resolution images from the crash site further supported the external explosion theory. Aviation experts noted that the nature of the debris pattern and impact sites were consistent with a mid-air detonation caused by an external strike, ruling out engine failure or onboard detonation. Then came Putin's apology to Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev, an implicit admission of responsibility, though not a public acknowledgement. Yet now, days later, a new Russian narrative emerges, a transcript leak implying a technical malfunction rather than an external attack, a media campaign to shift public perception. Going on with initial alternative theories, including claims that a bird strike caused an engine failure, or that a fuel tank explosion led to the crash, despite evidence pointing to an external impact. No official confirmation, just strategic ambiguity, the same approach used for MH17 and KAL 007. Azerbaijan's government remains unmoved by these shifting Russian explanations. President Ilham Aliyev has made it clear.
Bugün biz tam açık aydın diyebiliriz ki Rusya tarafından terör vuruldu.
We can clearly say today that the plane was shot down by Russia. This is a fact, and no one can deny this fact. Again, we are not saying that this was done intentionally, but it was done. We have clearly expressed our demands to the Russian side. These demands were officially communicated to them on the 27th of December. What do these demands consist of? First of all, the Russian side must apologize to Azerbaijan. Secondly, it must acknowledge its guilt. Thirdly, those responsible must be punished, brought to criminal responsibility, and compensation must be paid to the Azerbaijani state, to the injured passengers and crew members.
Və Azərbaycan dövlətinə və zərər çəkən sərnişin və ekipaj üzvlərinə təzminat ödəməlidir.
Will Russia acknowledge responsibility this time? With historical precedent in mind, the Aktau crash raises the same question as before. Will Moscow admit responsibility like it eventually did in 1990? Or will it continue the denialist playbook of 2014, refusing to take the blame indefinitely? The world is watching. The families of the victims deserve the truth.
3 people in Kyiv were killed as a result of a Russian drone attack, Ukrainian officials said. Meanwhile, Moscow reported repelling a large Ukrainian drone strike on multiple regions.
Russia and Ukraine continue their heavy use of drones as the war intensifies. Ukraine reports that a Russian drone attack on Friday night killed 3 civilians in Kyiv's central region. The Interior Ministry stated that drone debris killed 2 men and a woman, with another person injured. Local officials confirmed that the attack caused substantial damage to residential buildings, including a multi-story apartment complex, 8 private homes, commercial properties, and several private cars. Ukraine's air defense forces also reported shooting down 25 of the 58 drones launched by Russia in the recent overnight attack. Additionally, 27 drones were reportedly lost due to Ukraine's electronic warfare countermeasures, which diverted the incoming missiles. Meanwhile, Russia claims its air defense systems intercepted a massive Ukrainian drone attack, destroying 121 drones, including 6 over the Moscow region and 1 over the city. Moscow authorities reported no casualties or significant damage from the intercepted drones. The Russian Ministry of Defense further stated that drones targeted several regions, including the border areas of Bryansk, with most of them destroyed over the Kursk region near the Ukrainian border, as well as Ryazan, Belgorod, and the Russian-annexed Crimean Peninsula. As both sides continue their aerial combat, the toll on civilians and infrastructure remains high, with little sign of de-escalation.
Moscow says a no deal on Ukraine is possible without international guarantees that Kyiv will not seek NATO membership. Dasha Chernysova brings more on that from Moscow.
Moscow says it will seek international legal guarantees that would exclude Ukraine's NATO membership. That's according to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko. The diplomat says this is one of the key elements of a possible agreement on the conflict in Ukraine and would address the root causes of this conflict. He claims that in 2025, NATO will test the deployment of forces in Europe to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. However, Grushko added that Moscow has enough technical and military means to ensure its safety in any developments of this situation and in any scenario. His comments come as US President Donald Trump threatened Moscow with more sanctions if it rejects a deal on Ukraine. The Kremlin said there was nothing new in such threats and reiterated its openness to dialogue. President Trump also said that the OPEC Plus alliance of oil exporting countries shares responsibility for nearly 3 years of conflict in Ukraine because it has kept oil prices too high. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov responded, saying that the situation in Ukraine does not depend on the cost of oil. Peskov also says that the Kremlin is ready for signals from the United States regarding talks and says the ball is in the Americans' court, insisting that Russia has never rejected the talks. He says Russia considers it's necessary to resume negotiations with Washington on disarmament issues because Moscow believes this is in the interest of the entire world and the peoples of the 2 countries. Sergei Shoigu, Russia's former defense minister and now secretary of the Security Council, said on Friday that against the backdrop of increasing conflict and aggravation of geopolitical rivalry in the world, the risks of a violent clash between major states, including with the participation of nuclear powers, are growing. Dasha Chernysova in Moscow for AnewZ.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that slashing Russia's export revenues, including oil, is key to establishing peace. Zelensky's remarks come after Donald Trump said the war will end immediately if OPEC lowers oil prices. Ross Cullen reports from Kiev.
Well, Donald Trump has made oil one of the key themes of his first week back in the presidency, saying during his inauguration speech on Monday, drill, baby, drill, wanting to boost domestic production. But he's also spoken about the global oil market, saying that if prices come down, Russia could potentially be pushed towards the negotiating table. That is certainly something with which the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky agrees, saying that by slashing Russian oil revenues, making Russian oil less financially attractive, that could be a key driver in reaching a peace agreement. Also on Friday, news coming out of South Korea that North Korea is preparing to send more troops to fight for and with the Russian armed forces against Ukraine. Pyongyang has already sent 12,000 soldiers, along with artillery and missiles, to Russia. Some 4,000 North Korean soldiers have died in the conflict, according to Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and 2 North Korean prisoners of war are currently being held here in Ukraine. Also on North Korea, we understand that there are talks in Washington about trying to lay the groundwork for a possible phone call or meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Now, you might remember during his first term in office, there were 2 summits in 2018 and 2019 in Singapore and Vietnam between President Trump and the North Korean leader. So we could be seeing some of the groundwork put in place for a possible third meeting between the 2 leaders, influential players in the war in Ukraine, the United States an ally of Ukraine, and North Korea an ally of Russia. In terms of the latest attacks, according to the Ukrainian Air Force, overnight Thursday into Friday, Russia launched 58 Shahed drones towards Ukraine. 3 people died in a drone attack here in the Ukrainian capital region. 2 people lost their lives in Donetsk, and 1 person was killed in a drone attack in Kharkiv, which is Ukraine's second city. Ross Cullen for AnewZ in Kiev.
US President Donald Trump said he would like to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin for talks on ending the war in Ukraine. Speaking via link at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump expressed hope that China would be able to help the peace process.
Speaking via video link from Washington, D.C., President Donald Trump told global leaders in Davos on Thursday that he hopes to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin soon to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. He lamented the devastating human toll, describing the ongoing conflict as horrible.
One thing very important, I really would like to be able to meet with President Putin soon and get that war ended. And that's not from the standpoint of economy or anything else. It's from the standpoint of millions of lives are being wasted.
President Trump also highlighted the potential role of China in the peace process, expressing optimism about US-China relations and suggesting that Beijing could use its influence over Moscow to help end the conflict.
But we always had a great relationship, I would say, and we look forward to doing very well with China and getting along with China. Hopefully China can help us stop the war with, in particular, Russia, Ukraine. They have a great deal of power over that situation.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stressed the necessity of US military involvement for any effective peacekeeping force. In an interview with Bloomberg News, Zelensky called for stronger international guarantees, expressing concern that a ceasefire could allow Russia to regroup militarily. The Ukrainian leader also mentioned ongoing efforts to engage China in peace talks, but admitted frustration over limited communication with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Moscow rejected the idea of NATO countries sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire in the war with Russia, saying such a move would threaten to cause an uncontrollable escalation. Russia says it is open to a dialogue with US President Donald Trump, who has said he intends to bring a swift end to the war.
The 55th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland ended with the forum president's closing speech, identifying critical priorities in a new and more uncertain era.
The World Economic Forum in Davos has wrapped up its sessions. In his closing remarks, World Economic Forum President Borge Brende urged political and business leaders to work together to address global challenges. He stressed the importance of driving economic growth and reducing carbon emissions through cooperation.
Amazing meeting in the kingdom, and we're looking. I think we all realize during this week that we came together in Davos at a time of immense consequence and uncertainty. Political, geopolitical, and macroeconomic landscape all are shifting under our feet. At the very moment, the clock is quickly ticking down to meet critical political priorities. Driving economic growth, reducing carbon emissions, finding ways to end conflict, all cannot wait. And the only way to progress on these issues is by working together. But our cooperative approaches may need to adapt to a new, more uncertain era. There is a new political reality that we are faced with.
Over the 5-day forum, extensive discussions were held on topics such as the war in Ukraine, the Middle East crisis, the impact on artificial intelligence, and climate change. Additionally, the forum's agenda was influenced by the early days of United States President Donald Trump's presidency.
We will need to be innovative and creative and work with each other, even if we don't see eye to eye on everything. Our week in Davos showed that this is possible. Leaders from around the world, from the public and private sectors, with different views gathered to show how we can collaborate.
This year's forum will be remembered as a platform where global leaders once again underscored the necessity of cooperation and explored solutions to pressing global issues.
The Bank of Japan has announced a much-anticipated raise in interest rates from 0.25 to 0.5%, its highest level since the 2008 global financial crisis. The decision marks the Bank of Japan's first rate hike since July and comes just days after Donald Trump returned to the White House. The bank said it will continue to raise the key short-term rate if the economy and prices move in line with its expectations. The Japanese yen gained some stability against the dollar following the announcement, having previously floundered between marginal gains and losses. Several thousand gathered in Aschaffenburg in the south of Germany to mourn the victims of a deadly knife attack that left 2 people dead, including a toddler.
Around 3,000 people gathered in the southern German town of Aschaffenburg on Thursday to mourn the victims of a knife attack. A 41-year-old German man and a 2-year-old boy of Moroccan descent were killed, while a 2-year-old Syrian girl was injured in the attack on Wednesday. Mourners observed a moment of silence and placed candles and flowers at a memorial in the park where the attack occurred.
The boy also lived in my neighborhood, and I used to see him from time to time, and he was full of life and full of joy. It's sick. I have no words.
Khalid Melek, chairman of the Islamic Cultural Association in Aschaffenburg, said the large turnout provided some comfort.
This is definitely comforting. That's also something I take away for the family, especially for the mother, because there are so many people here. It's incredible. It shows our cohesion in this country.
The suspect, a 28-year-old man from Afghanistan, was brought before a judge on Thursday. He had a history of violent behavior and was undergoing psychiatric treatment. Although his asylum process had been closed and he had agreed to voluntarily leave Germany in December, he remained in the country under treatment. The stabbings are part of a string of violent attacks in Germany that have raised concerns over security and migration ahead of parliamentary elections on February 23rd.
Massive wildfires continue to devastate the Los Angeles area, with thousands of people on new evacuation orders. In the meantime, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a $2.5 billion relief package to aid the fire-ravaged region.
A new wildfire, the Hughes Fire, broke out north of Los Angeles on Thursday, prompting mandatory evacuations for over 31,000 people. Firefighters are battling the blaze in difficult conditions, with high winds and low humidity adding to the challenge. While containment efforts have increased to 24%, authorities warn that strong winds could push the fire further into nearby areas. At the same time, the Eaton and Palisades fires continue to burn in the metropolitan area, with both fires now burning for 17 days. These fires have killed 28 people and damaged or destroyed nearly 16,000 structures. Meanwhile, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a $2.5 billion relief package aimed at supporting recovery efforts. But billions more in federal aid will be needed, as experts estimate the total damage could exceed $250 billion. While some rain is expected this weekend, it may bring further risks, including mudslides in fire-affected areas, raising concerns about further damage.
Syria's de facto leader Ahmed al-Shara said that his country is prepared to welcome UN forces into the UN-established buffer zone with Israel. Talking to a Turkish media outlet, Shara said that Israel sought to advance into Syria due to the presence of Iranian-backed militias and Hezbollah. But with Syria's liberation, he added, that reason no longer exists. Israel says that activities of the groups it deems hostile have led to airstrikes and military presence near the border.
I believe that Syria today has just come out of an exhausting war, and there are many diplomatic means. And we have spoken to a lot of countries on the issue, including Recep Tayyip Erdogan, as well as all the Arab countries and all the Western countries, and there is a consensus against an Israeli advance. We are using legal methods during this time. We have sent a letter to the United Nations where we mentioned we are committed to the 1974 agreement and are ready to receive the United Nations forces to be in the buffer zone between us and Israel, and are ready to protect these forces and deliver them to their official positions.
Saudi Arabia's foreign minister visited Lebanon for talks with the country's new leadership. During the first visit by a Saudi foreign minister in 15 years, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud emphasized the need for reforms to address Lebanon's deepening financial crisis. After meeting Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun, bin Farhan told reporters that Saudi Arabia had great confidence that the country's new leadership would work on necessary reforms. Hamas has named 4 hostages to be released on Saturday under the Gaza ceasefire deal. The 4 hostages, said to be female soldiers, are set to be freed in exchange for 180 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. It will be the second exchange since the ceasefire came into effect last Sunday. During the first swap, 3 hostages and 90 prisoners were released. An official at the United Nations warned that insufficient funds threaten the ability to continue aid flows to Gaza.
A United Nations official says funding shortages may affect the UN's ability to maintain aid flows at target levels in Gaza. Daily aid deliveries have surged tenfold since the ceasefire deal took effect, surpassing the 600 trucks a day target set out for the first 7 weeks of the ceasefire. That's according to the United Nations. However, with hundreds of thousands of people left homeless and reliant on outside aid for survival after 15 months of war, the efforts to maintain aid is threatened by insufficient funds.
Funding is an issue. We need immediate funding to make sure that we continue providing the aid for the 42 days, but also after the 42 days, because we're hopeful that we'll go from phase 1 to phase 2. So definitely we need more funding. We need to buy tents. We need to buy other humanitarian aid. There is a lot that needs to be done.
Immediate priorities for the people of Gaza include restocking hospital supplies, delivering food and repairing water networks. Difficulty in moving food and supplies through damaged streets has posed further challenges.
On challenges, there are a lot of people on the road moving, and the roads are destroyed. But that's something we were expecting. people going. They're, of course, in numbers, in huge numbers, and increasing every day. And I think over the weekend, when they're able to move to the north, that is really going to become an issue, because you know how the road network there is. It's totally destroyed, of course.
The United Nations is seeking $4.1 billion for the Palestinian territories this year, with nearly 90% set to go to Gaza. Currently, 3.6% has been funded.
Over in Thailand, severe air pollution in Bangkok prompted city officials to close more than 350 schools. Locals are calling on the implementation of more measures to address the recurring problem.
Bangkok is facing severe air pollution, with thick smog blanketing the city on Friday. With an air quality index of 187, the city was ranked as the 5th most polluted in the world. Many residents, particularly those spending time outdoors, have reported health issues like difficulty breathing and throat irritation.
The air is so bad. When there's a lot of dust, it affects me directly. And since I have a daughter, it greatly impacts her health. Instead of her going out to play, the dust prevents her from doing so. The pollution and breathing the air in leads to allergies. It's really not okay for me or the people around me.
In response, the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration closed 352 schools across the city's 31 districts, affecting thousands of students. This marks the largest number of school closures since 2020. As Bangkok struggles with worsening air pollution, residents are calling for stronger measures to tackle the recurring issue.
I'd like the relevant agencies to do more to manage and deal with the dust, because it happens every year. It keeps coming back and it's getting worse each time. They should take more action, not just announce high dust levels and close schools. There needs to be more than that.
The government is also taking action to reduce pollution by offering free public transportation for a week and restricting heavy vehicles in the city. The pollution is caused by a combination of seasonal weather conditions, crop burning smoke, and car emissions. PM2.5 levels hit 180 micrograms per cubic meter on Friday, well above the World Health Organization's recommended limit of 15. Officials have urged residents to stay indoors and work from home to minimize exposure to harmful particles.
Rescuers in Indonesia continue to search for survivors after a landslide in the country's central Java province killed at least 25 people. Torrential rain in Pekalongan caused a landslide on Tuesday on a main road connecting the city with a tourist area, the Dieng Plateau. 25 people were injured. Heavy machinery was deployed to clear road access for search teams. The National Emergency Agency warned residents that rain was expected in the next few days, which could cause more landslides and flash floods. US President Donald Trump has ordered officials to make plans to declassify remaining files on the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. While some of the files have been released over the years, many remain heavily redacted.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive.
US President Trump has signed an executive order to declassify files related to the 1960s assassinations of 3 pivotal American figures: John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. The move follows years of public demand for full disclosure of government documents that have remained under wraps, including the FBI and CIA investigations into the killings. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963 has long sparked debate, with official records attributing the killing to a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. However, many Americans continue to believe in alternative theories involving government agencies or other groups. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of John F. Kennedy, has long questioned the official narratives surrounding the assassinations of both his father and his uncle. He welcomed the decision to declassify the files. Previously, he has publicly suggested that Sirhan Sirhan, who was convicted of killing his father, did not act alone. Meanwhile, the King family also expressed their hopes for the full release of files concerning Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1968 assassination. MLK's children welcomed the order but stressed the need to review the files privately before they are made public. The King family has long questioned the FBI's role in the surveillance and treatment of their father. While the order allows for declassification, the files won't be released immediately. The National Intelligence Director and the US Attorney General are tasked with creating a plan for the release within the next 45 days for the King and RFK files and 15 days for the JFK files.
Once again, the top story of the day. An AnewZ investigation has revealed new details about the Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 crash. Sources indicate that the aircraft was brought down by a missile and those responsible have been identified. Azerbaijan insists on full accountability and is prepared to take legal action if necessary. Here's the latest.
As the investigation into the Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 crash continues, new findings emerging from Russian sources suggest that the aircraft was shot down by a Pantsir S-1 air defense system, which had been brought to Russia from Syria. According to reliable sources familiar with the investigation, Russian officials have also determined that electronic warfare systems were deployed against the Azerbaijani aircraft, leading to severe malfunctions in its control systems before the crash. Sources indicate that Russian investigators have identified both the individual who launched the missile and the official who gave the order. However, it remains unclear whether Moscow will publicly disclose their names or attempt to evade responsibility. AnewZ is actively working to verify the authenticity of the names we obtained. Diplomatic sources confirm that Azerbaijan refuses to allow the case to be hushed up and remains resolute in its demand for accountability. Should Russia attempt to avoid responsibility, Baku intends to take the matter to international courts to ensure justice for the victims. The latest revelations align with Azerbaijan's initial findings, which pointed to an external explosion as the likely cause of the crash. High-resolution images and forensic analysis from the crash site indicated that the damage was consistent with a missile strike, not an internal malfunction. In a previous statement, Azerbaijan's Minister of Digital Development and Transport, Rashad Nabiev, noted that preliminary investigation results had already ruled out any technical failure or pilot error, reinforcing the missile strike theory. Azerbaijani President İlham Aliyev also made Azerbaijan's position clear.
Bugün biz tam açıkaydı. Diyebiliriz ki Rusya tarafından terör vuruldu.
We can clearly say today that the plane was shot down by Russia. This is a fact, and no one can deny this fact. Again, we are not saying that this was done intentionally, but it was done. We have clearly expressed our demands to the Russian side. These demands were officially communicated to them on the 27th of December. What do these demands consist of? First of all, the Russian side must apologize to Azerbaijan. Secondly, it must acknowledge its guilt. Thirdly, those responsible must be punished, brought to criminal responsibility, and compensation must be paid to the Azerbaijani state, to the injured passengers and crew members. These are our conditions.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you for watching and have a nice evening.